Hi everyone, today I have some cool news. I got to play test Project L, and I kind of want to talk about some things I like about the game, some things I dislike. We'll watch the footage, we'll talk about things that came to my attention, some things that I thought were, again, cool, some things I thought that were not so cool. Riot has been very direct and very clear that they want very genuine feedback, so I wouldn't take this as like, oh, this is how the game's going to be on release, for sure. It's very likely they'll change a lot. It's very likely they'll decide to do some things and not other things. They may keep some things that get complained about, they may not, but I think almost certainly it's going to change a lot. And it's very clearly an early phase into the game. It has 3 characters right now, which I think for a 2v2 game is very telling that it's very early. Both a blessing and a curse, because I think there's a lot of stuff that is good about the game, but also some stuff I would like to complain about. I played Darius, and a character I actually can't talk about. So I'm going to tell you about Darius exclusively.
We call the week. Starting now.
Darius is a mid-range character. Pretty much he wounds you by hitting you with the tip of his axe in a few moves. And if you get hit by it, if Echo blocks, in this context, each normal and move will do chip damage, and this is applicable also to the other characters. So like if Darius tagged out to Ari would still do chip damage to Echo, which is extremely powerful and something that I think is a little excessive for a game where not everyone has a mechanic like that. Also, you can see here's some of the chip going off on Ari. It adds up. Like it does do a decent amount of chip just from one mini block string. And so if you tag in and you use that as like a way of starting stuff, it's quite good. He's a good wall character and definitely does a lot of damage. And definitely, like, if you want a day 1 character, I bet you he's going to be the day 1 character. You know what I mean? There's Burris. Let's talk about Burris. It's pretty interesting. You can see the bars underneath each player's health. Those are burst bars, or burst gauges, I should say. Kind of an interesting thing about burst. This is how it looks, obviously, if you successfully burst. It's a green kind of explosion from a green ball explosion. And if you block it, instead of like, in most games, if you bait burst, you just fall down and you get punished. The orb goes red. Like the orb goes red, it explodes, and then they bounce off the wall. And you get a combo off it, which is it's very satisfying baiting burst like this. It is extremely satisfying and really cool, honestly. Anti-airs in this game are very common. I think every character also has a DP, but it does not look like a DP. You may notice this lost. This is the safe jump, but this is actually a DP. So you can see the normal looks like it should be hitting. Pretty much the safe jump gets ruined by this wake up button, which it's not a button, it's actually a DP. So you can do wake up attacks like this in the game and they function as DPs for every character, basically. Not a fan of this mechanic in a lot of ways. One, it's hard to tell really what's going on. It just looks like you almost missed your melee, kind of. And I think most people, if they watch this, they'd be like, oh, I missed it. It feels bad to do because it's unimpactful. It's not like a DP where it's like, oh, you see like the dude flies in the sky and something happened. But this, it's like, it's a little more muted and I don't really like that. I think it'd be really cool to have a little more exaggeration or emphasis on this because it's hard to really tell what's going on sometimes. But it's just like a kind of a get off me tool. Pretty noteworthy for that, but not a fan of it. Another thing I wasn't super fond of is actually defensive mechanics in the game. There's a lot of really good defensive mechanics. One is a retreating guard. You just give up space, you just walk back. It can be baited by block strings, so not infallible. There's a parry, toss a bar, but if you successfully parry, you get to your bar back. And there is a push guard, like that, as you can see. One thing that kind of sucks is it's very expensive. It's actually 1 bar for a push guard. You can see it sends them like pretty much full screen. So it's a strong push guard. However, I would say one thing that kind of sucks about this game and this stage is that you don't gain meter very easily. And I think because of that, it heavily encourages a sort of style or game plan of either early on you bulldoze them, because if you can kind of corner them before they get any meter, they are locked out of almost every defensive option capable to them outside of get up attack. That's really one thing that sucks. And obviously if you burst and you're locked out of that, either making meter a little faster to get, almost essential for how slowly you gain, because I really want you to pay attention to how slow we gain meter. And the other side kind of encourages really hyper defensive play. Another reason for that is, again, the clock. The clock is about 120 seconds. Even, again, if you play really, really solid and you're like really good at managing your character's health, it's very likely you'll time out. There's like obviously fun stalling, like playing lame parentheses fun, and there's playing lame parentheses unfun. And I think it kind of borders on the latter if the game stayed like this. So that's something I would like to see change. Offense feels really good to do, and I talked about, I think movement is really, really good and smooth. And like doing all of this, it's very seamless. It feels good to do with some exceptions. So one other thing to talk about that's kind of neat is fuses. Every team has like a buff they can choose. There's 4 of them in the game currently. One is called Fury. I think they talked about that. I'll talk about the one I used a lot, which is Freestyle. It's the one being used on the left right now. It is essentially, you are allowed 2 handshake tags in the sequence instead of 1. So like, let's say you tag in your assist, you can instantly tag back, and especially if you're doing a pressure sequence, which is very powerful. And especially in the context of Darius, with the mechanic we talked about with Wound, where it applies a lot of chip, it was very useful for me to do. Very useful to have, and I think almost essential for Darius. So you can see handshake tag to Darius. Darius is a block string and tags back. But there's 2 other ones. One, for example, is you get 2 attacks in an assist sequence. So like you call assist. If you have that fuse, you get 2 attacks. So you can see it's quite good and quite interesting. I can't quite remember what the last one is. They're all pretty useful, but I think it really depends on what type of character you have and what you're going for, which I think is another cool way of seeing some playstyles kind of shine. To talk a little more about what I like about the game, I think again they've mentioned this, but if you're unfamiliar, this is a duos game. So this is not actually 1v1. This is a 2v2, and not just like in terms of playstyle. Like this is literally 2 players playing on a team. So you can see one is, friend the stream, fun tax, and Unoid, and they're each controlling their own character, which is a very cool concept. I think it's super fun. I think it's really neat. I don't think competitively it'll see much use because there's way more room for error. Obviously, you can mess up each other's combos, you can mess up each other's block strings, stuff like that. But it's really cool when things work out and it feels smooth to do. I think that's a really great feeling that I haven't really felt from a lot of fighting games. And one thing that's really cool about it is it's not tied to a game mode. In this game, like you can duo against a solo team, you can solo versus solo, you can duo versus duo. It's built in, which is really cool. I think it's going to make some really interesting tournaments. It's going to be very cool, and some very cool storylines probably will pop up from it because team stuff is fun, and it's something that's not really explored. And it's something I really liked. I played a lot with Stay Jam and Kizzy, friends of the stream, in duos, and it felt good to play. But again, I don't particularly envision it for competitive play. Though it would be cool. It'd be really cool. It'd be really cool. Another thing I really like about this game is the general pace of it. I think it's a very fun, fast game, like I said. And I think it's very movement focused, which is really cool and something that definitely feels good to play. And especially a lot of movement options are very strong. Even someone like Darius, who's like the slowest character in the build, he feels fun to move with. I mean, that's a good sign. If the slowest character feels smooth, that's pretty cool. But I think again, the feeling of the vibe of the game is really good, and it's again super fun to play. But I would say like some mechanics just like go up against the intended experience, I think, a bit. So that's one thing I'm really hoping they change, both in terms of like the meter stuff and the time a bit. It doesn't need to be a lot, doesn't need to be entirely game-changing stuff, but I think it's something that would make the game feel a little like more balanced, basically, that sort of thing. Because I think a lot of the mechanics are great. They're not new to team fighter stuff at all. Like parry or push block in team games are obviously common, but I think it's a little much. But obviously, I don't think it can be like free either. I think that there's probably a good middle ground to kind of break in that sort of way. Every character has an air throw as well, which also feels really good to do. At the same time, also, anti-airs are pretty strong in this game. They feel very, very powerful to do, and so as a result, I don't know why you'd go for an air throw like that instead of, say, just anti-airing, which leads to way more combos. Most characters don't really get anything off of an air throw, it seems. I know if you have like a solid OTG, Darius has his little spin move. You've probably seen him do it a few times. Do this move from the air, basically, where he's like spinning with his axe. I think one other complaint I have about the game is sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on, especially a lot of assists are on the screen and there's a lot of things happening, or like you bait burst or something like that. While you're playing, it can be kind of hard to tell what's happening, and especially assists can stay on the screen for a very long time, like extremely long times, and it centers the camera on them. So sometimes you can almost make jank mix-ups out of like how the HUD or like the camera perspective lingers a bit too long. You may notice that even though Darius is dead on the right, Echo has a last stand ready. It's basically just an extremely buffed assist. Honestly, it's 10 seconds for an assist in contrast to, I think, about 3 seconds for your regular assist. And I think it's very good. It's almost too good. Pretty much like a character does a super as an assist, kind of. I would like to see that get toned down a bit because you can see it here, though it doesn't hit. This is Darius's last stand here. And you can see it just fills up the screen. It's just a giant, it's like someone threw red paint over like the center of the screen, sort of. It's red everywhere. Some things like that, like small like HUD things, or like it lingers too long or stuff like that, is another sign of like it's a little early. Well, I guess be harsh because they want that feedback, but you know what I mean? It's not something like, oh, my opinion of the game is dictated by this. As someone that doesn't play tag games, and like if you're curious, like, oh, I play Gear, I play Street Fighter, would I like this game? I would say yes, especially if you like Gear. There's a lot of Gear feeling in how they want the characters to be. Like basically, it feels like in the same sort of vibes as Gear. They make rules for what each character does, and then they usually have an option to invalidate it with the character's mechanic. You know, Echo being able to just like teleport around and like mix you by himself pretty much is quite notable, right? Because like Darius, for example, can't do that. He's more of like a mid dispenser with chips, right? That's like how it works for him. Ari, like for example, could be really, really strong, but requires an assist, right? And that's kind of like how it works. It's like, oh, not many characters get chipped from hitting them on block, but Darius does. They get a mechanic that makes them stand out, usually. Arias, Foxfire, which busts your combos and stuff like that, right? I would say that it feels good as a Gear player, and it's especially approachable enough to pick up and play. It's definitely like there are, you know, some people do not like one-button special moves, but I feel like it complements this game very well, and it's something that they've clearly emphasized that it doesn't contrast against the complexity of the game. I think this game is like probably going to be an ideal first team game if you're especially primarily focused on, you know, 1v1 fighters. I think it's a really cool concept. I like 2v2 games. I think that's always been interesting and kind of a subject, a topic, or a genre, I guess you can say, that doesn't get used that often. The 2v2 I think is kind of a sweet spot of like really interesting to me, that and not really done that much, that I really like. I think that how this game is gonna feel in terms of balance is also gonna depend on what type of characters they make and what kind of mechanics they give. Personally, Riot, if you want to make me happy, please add Set. That dude is ridiculous, and it'd be cool punching people and like pile driving them and shit. I think that if you're new to fighting games, this is also a great one because there's a lot of stuff that allows you to just pick it up and play, which I think is super critical and super important for just like learning how to get and understand the mind games of fighting games. Like understanding when you can just get into directly, like, oh, I think they're gonna do this, so I do that. I think is critical to helping people learn fighting games well, and also critical just helping people feel comfortable jumping into games. I don't think of Gear as my first introduction to actually learning how to play fighting games. I think of Persona, usually. Persona was one of the games that actually taught me how to understand the mind games and how to play things a little better than just like turn brain off, press button fast, hope I win. And I think that's really, it's cool to feel. There's obviously, again, short amount of time with it, but the complexity of it seems really interesting, and definitely a lot there. Definitely more than I can even say, actually. Some things under wrap, but I would say that if you're nervous about the complexity of it, I think you should be. I think any system mechanic heavy game is probably going to be very fun, and it's going to have a lot of player expression, and I really like that. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope this helped kind of give you my thoughts, explain some things about it. That is cool. And yeah, I'll see you guys again next time. Bye bye.